Relationships are complicated. There's no guarantee that an outwardly stable love life will maintain its sheen and luster through the passage of time. Disagreements are bound to pop up, and at times, issues become so great between both parties that continuing is foolhardy. That's not to say a perfect scenario exists where zero arguments arise. With enough dedication, effort, and understanding of the significant other, couples can not only work out the kinks, but also strengthen their bonds and themselves as individuals. Communication is the cornerstone upon which a healthy relationship thrives, and a lack thereof can prove disastrous, even in an ideal situation. First-hand experience in this matter is not something I possess, but as someone that has seen this scenario play out via friends and family throughout the years, my naive outlook in terms of how real relationships develop and operate has created an admittedly shaky foundation for recognizing the signs of a stable or deteriorating partnership. Which is why Kanojo Okarishimasu hurts to watch. 20-year-old college freshman Kazuya Kinoshita enjoys the gift of love for but a brief moment when the series begins. Almost immediately, his first ever girlfriend amicably breaks it off with him, sending him into a depressive spiral that leads him to trying out the rental girlfriend service out of a need to fill the void. What precedes is an ever-complicating series of events that ensures he can no longer maintain a single stable relationship, due largely in part to his own flaws and set pieces that trace back to him after some time. Now, the first question that comes to mind is a simple one. What the heck is a rental girlfriend? In essence, they're contracted employees that spend time with clients and request their services via an application, for a fee. This is a real industry, by the way, though in countries like China and Japan, their scope extends beyond girlfriends. There are also several restrictions placed upon the clients and employees to prevent the industry from being perceived as prostitution under a different name. This comparison would still be the case in the United States because of the existing escort industry, but due to the wider reach of the rental companion service in some countries, it holds less dubious connotations where such a concept is considered mainstream. You could even rent parents for a day. The world of Kanojo Okarishimasu, or rent-a-girlfriend as it's officially translated, focuses almost entirely on the girlfriend aspect of the rental service. While there are potentially countless candidates one could choose from per day, or even per hour, the story only ever explores the lives of a handful of them that are deemed relevant to the protagonist's ongoing plight of getting over his relationship woes. As this series is still ongoing and there's no clear ending in sight, this write-up will instead focus on each of the core characters and how they impact the story, if at all. Spoilers abound as the contents henceforth reach the ending of the anime's first season and later chapters of the source material up to 156. Rent-a-girlfriend should not be watched in the presence of people that aren't aware of the more questionable anime tropes, and can't necessarily stomach anime being anime, mostly in part due to its protagonist. As these scenes are considered essential to the experience, glossing over them is almost impossible. But I'll try anyway.
はじめまして、水原千鶴と言います。
Kazuya's first attempt to supplant his non-existent relationship is to seek out the services of a new face in the rental industry, Chizuru Mizuhara. At 19, Mizuhara fancies herself as a Victoria's Secret model with a porcelain appearance and personality that secures her an easy 5-star rating from all of her customers. This is all an elaborate show, obviously, as the real Chizuru uses the rental service as a means to both save up money for school and build upon her impressive acting skills. As Kazuya finds out after deliberately breaking the facade in a fit of misplaced rage, Chizuru's sharp gaze is only matched by her razor tongue and quick wit. She's a professional through and through, and she most definitely won't take unsolicited advances or personal attacks sitting down. She's shown to hold a genuine interest in the well-being of others with no gain on her end, so she's not entirely frigid when the situation calls for it. It's not hard to see why she's considered the best character in the series. She's the only one that receives a proper setup and maintains an interesting dynamic with the protagonist, though this doesn't mean she's perfect. Later events in the manga reveal that her real self may also just be an act to shield off her insecurities from prying eyes. Acting is her passion to the point where she immersed herself completely in the concept during her teenage years. With the only family she has left in this world being her grandmother, the sociable Chizuru outwardly establishes herself as an independent and capable person, but deep down she holds serious doubts regarding her own self-worth and abilities as a rising actress. Through Kazuya's exceptionally deep pockets and penchant for misplaced love, she's ironically never alone, even if her most frequent customer is someone with whom she would never associate outside of her job and school. As the story progresses, it's made clear that Chizuru's circle of close friends is quite small, almost non-existent. Kazuya is one of the few people she interacts with on a seemingly daily basis beyond a simple hello, due in part to her belief that nobody is entirely truthful. In a way, his dumb honesty keeps her interested because he's different, even if she consistently refuses his claim when asked directly. Seeing as how she understandably wants to keep her job and personal life as mutually exclusive concepts, she needs to keep up the charade with Kazuya out of a concern that either of them would do something that would perceivably damage the other's life. This isn't exactly necessary in Kazuya's case, as I'll explain later, but Mizuhara cares enough about his situation to try and help him stand on his own 2 feet and become a better person while they're dating, almost as if she was his guidance counselor. There's a reason the story labels her as the ideal girlfriend.
乾杯。
乾杯。
それ誰じゃないの？
Shortly after the mock relationship begins between Kazuya and Mizuhara, an old flame makes her presence known to the hapless homunculus. The 19-year-old Mami Nanami is many things in Kazuya's life, but really, she's none of those ideals he holds dear. Appearing like she hopped out of the pages of 17 magazine, Mami's outward demeanor is that of a bubbly sweet girl with a kind heart and gentle attitude. Like Chizuru, this is all an act to keep up appearances, as her true self cares very little about others to the point of exhibiting sociopathic tendencies at times.
あ、そう。
She's often portrayed in an antagonistic light whenever she's given any screen time, vying to break up the sudden relationship or relationships that Kazuya finds himself in by any means necessary. I genuinely wanted to like this character for what she represents in the story, but honestly, she feels incomplete. Not much is known about the character at the moment to provide context for her actions or why she decides to fixate on Kazuya specifically. As a result, the audience is left to assume almost anything about her true intentions are presented with new scenes. Despite being built up as this constant destructive occurrence in Kazuya's life post-breakup, she hardly appears in the story save for instances where she shows up without any warning whatsoever. The intrigue of her double-faced dialogue is almost immediately obliterated when considering that she decisively only wants one thing: Kazuya's headspace. A much better story would make Mami a more prominent presence in Kazuya's life that presents him with a do-over for building a real relationship, all the while showing her outside of the public eye to explore who she is and potentially her own conflicted feelings on the matter of companionship. The narrative up until this point toys with this idea, but it ultimately doesn't go anywhere with the concept. Instead, the audience is given a spiteful ex and only wants her boy toy to come crawling back so she can likely begin the cycle again. The label Little Devil Ex-Girlfriend is right on the money here. If only she lived up to that title for me to care.
ごめんね、カズくん。私、カズヤさんの彼女です。
After a series of events where it's made painfully obvious that things are stymied, a new element is introduced to push things in a new, uncomfortable direction. Ruka Sarashina runs into Kazuya at random and 2 things are made clear during this encounter. The author finds her aesthetically pleasing and she's incredibly childish. It's revealed that she's also a rental girlfriend, but her intentions for doing so fall under the innocent notion of finding her true love among the thousands of faces she encounters. Kazuya passes this test during an extended stalking session where he breaks her fall as she slips over some stairs, and she immediately takes a liking to his kindness towards Chizuru, a girl she immediately identified as a rental girlfriend previously. In that respect, passing her test is extremely easy. I'm surprised nobody had done it prior to this point. Obviously, catching someone from a potentially lethal drop is worth at least something, but her reasoning for clinging to Kazuya rings hollow. Behaving like a nice guy isn't all that impressive for the sake of appealing to others and is a romantic concept that only seems to exist in fiction. As an aside, being a nice guy doesn't fit Kazuya's character at all, but I'm getting ahead of myself. What's made even more confusing is that she's revealed to have a heart condition that gives her a slower beat per minute cycle than her peers, a quirk that ultimately means nothing after her introduction. Her deciding that Kazuya was the one came as a result of her normally slow heart rate drastically increasing when near him, obviously a sign that he makes her Kokoro go doki doki with his charms. This ultimately leads her to assert her love for him in increasingly personal situations, as if his presence was heart medication with slight addictive properties for her. Ruka supplants herself as the next major antagonist of the story by essentially forcing Kazuya to be her boyfriend in exchange for keeping the rental girlfriend aspect of his relationship with Chizuru a secret. In a better story, this would be another route to explore where a forced relationship between 2 characters would allow them to experience the pros and cons of sharing themselves, while also presenting them with several opportunities to grow and change as individuals based on events arising from their obligatory dates. Heck, they can even begin to form a genuine attraction to one another if they discover traits about themselves that are appealing, or they begin to see each other as actually dependable or charming after the grace period passes. Or, both mutually agree that they're simply incompatible with one another and the relationship is broken off. To some degree, the story appears to go down this explorative and eventual forlorn route with Ruka, but it's almost entirely ruined by one simple fact that taints all of her screen time. She's a minor! With that, her prior descriptions and actions begin to make a lot more sense. Multiple characters comment on the fact that she looks young, and Kazuya himself brings up this factor in compromising scenarios, discarding the art style makes her appear younger arguments right into the trash. Until further notice, she simply cannot be an option for Kazuya to explore, but the situation she creates ensures she can't be left out of the story so soon. Her presence is second only to Chizuru, which is disheartening to see since Mami's gimmick of being the vengeful ex that wants to see her plaything back to where he was at the start of the series is compelling enough for a dedicated antagonist role. It's redundant, and I can only speculate Ruka was given prominence because writing for someone like Mami would involve more thought and planning than the kid that wants to play with the big boys. Puppy love sure is a lot more powerful these days than when I first experienced it. I would have liked Ruka as the trial girlfriend if she withheld the full version from Kazuya until she was of drinking age.
さようなら、和也さん。
Sumi exists. Okay, fine.
ありがとう。
Sumi is introduced around the time where Kazuya wishes he could have some peace and quiet in his life. In many respects, the demure and almost mute Sumi is exactly what he needs. The 19-year-old university freshman is another rental girlfriend that is introduced to Kazuya at the behest of Chizuru wanting her to not completely suck at her job. Her reserved nature doesn't resonate well with her clients that prefer their cute girls to actually speak to them and take charge, so Kazuya occasionally requests her services as a means to help her overcome her crippling shyness. As a result, she immediately ends up taking a liking to him and will defy her position as a rental girlfriend to genuinely spend time with him after hours, a scenario that conveniently happens whenever Kazuya is stuck dealing with personal issues he can't resolve. For what little screen time she gets, I like the concept behind Sumi. In a way, she's the perfect foil to Kazuya for reasons I'll get into when it's his turn. While she has an immense phobia of using her words, it doesn't detract from her efforts to actually improve herself and offer helping hand whenever she notices her friends in need. Her dates with Kazuya progressively become more involved with intricate schedules specifically designed to appeal to his interests, showcasing that she's beginning to adapt to her job and greatly expanding her comfort zone. Naturally, she's a master of conveying the right message without saying much at all, even if that comes as the result of her socially awkward personality. A shame all of her efforts are going to Kazuya and are in part motivated by him, but I guess love is blind at times and I'm jumping a couple paragraphs in saying that. I sincerely hope that the shy girlfriend moniker becomes a formality for this character in the future. Before jumping into the next segment, I feel it's appropriate to talk about the side series that began a fair ways into the main series run. Kanojo Hitomi Shirimasu focuses on Sumi's perspective before and after she meets Kazuya, with some chance encounters mixed in to add flavor. In these chapters, Sumi gets to experience what each of the other girls does on their own time away from Kazuya. Seeing as how the time frame is set to a few days prior to her meeting Kazuya, Sumi notes that Ruka won't stop talking about her boyfriend to her other friends, while also later observing how Mami manipulates a group of boys into doing her midterms and pampering her like a princess without having to lift a finger, culminating with her giving them a false name so they couldn't find her. The miniseries is a refreshing change of pace for the story that's being told. Sumi doubles as both the protagonist of the miniseries and the color commentator whenever the current chapter shifts focus to the other girls. While it does lead into some mildly amusing scenarios and provides some context for each of the girls, the spin-off can be ignored without losing much in the way of development. The handful of chapters available at the moment are a clear example of the author's ability to write for other characters aside from Kazuya, and Sumi's lack of dialogue in the main series provides the audience with a clear image of her nuances when reading through the spin-off. If it continues, I'd definitely be interested in reading through it just to revisit scenarios from a much cleaner point of view. I think it's better than the current state of the main story by country miles, given that it's based on a character that honestly tries to better themselves on the path to an unrealistic goal. Last, but certainly not least, is the protagonist of this story. From the outset, his character is laid out to the audience as that of an average teenager going through the growing pains of maturing into a responsible adult. With nothing but a small loan of 1,000,000 yen from his father to cover his living expenses and university costs, Kazuya makes do with what he has, while also attempting to course correct his love life after it's cut short. He shows some amount of responsibility by being able to look after a koi for several months without complications, and he's able to properly feed and clothe himself. Later on, he even holds down a part-time job when his initial funds run dry. He makes great strides to improve the lives of those he cares about, an ultimately selfless trait that is perfectly counterbalanced by one annoying aspect of his character. He's still got a ways to go, and neither he nor the story is interested in improving beyond what's been established. From his more questionable thoughts to his tremendous leaps in logic, Kazuya remains much the same character at this current point in the story as he was at the start. For other characters, this would be a positive trait because their base personalities are enduring enough to not only believably drive the plot forward, but also influence the supporting cast to change for the better. Kazuya unfortunately takes this concept and hides behind it with lip service. There are multiple points in the story where he laments how much of a loser he is and how his current situation is understandably pathetic, but he never does anything to undo these negative aspects of himself. His pseudo-harem flocks to him because of his supposed selfless acts directed towards Chizuru, but in all honesty, he should be putting this effort into improving himself first and foremost. This idealized version of himself that they all see would be perfectly acceptable if he actually took steps to match that description, but it never happens. I don't consider myself to be all that critical of his character for a decently good reason. I was Kazuya. There was a time where I could relate to certain aspects of his character, but looking back on it after learning what I know now, I can tell he's simply lost in his own logic. The story doesn't do enough to encourage him to change his behavior, and oftentimes it bolsters his resolve to continue. Not even his friends provide him with a reason to improve, even implicitly. Much like the precarious predicament that keeps him and Chizuru together, the circumstances surrounding his life exacerbate his flaws to rather obscene degrees. Putting others ahead of yourself is admirable, sure, but even that has its limits for most people. In the span of a single semester, Kazuya manages to spend nearly all of his funds specifically on Chizuru, a notion that I consider completely unacceptable because that cash was meant specifically to set the foundation to improve himself via attending university, not to squander it on a girl that probably doesn't even like him. There are multiple points where he even considers ditching the rental service entirely to live a normal life, but due to his own indecisiveness and convenient circumstances that prevent the straightforward solution from being utilized, this idea keeps getting pushed back while the consequences associated with it only increase in scope and severity. He really should have told his grandmother what was going on from as early as chapter 3, but given how that conversation played out, he almost ended up irreparably damaging Chizuru's life. The man simply doesn't think when he speaks, and at worst, he doesn't know when to stop talking. There's some humor to be found in hearing how he runs his mouth to make situations exceedingly awkward for everybody, but in the moment, it encapsulates one of the many reasons why he has so much trouble finding an actual girlfriend. His inherent lack of a backbone is painful to see in action, with his lifeline coming in the form of standing up for the sake of others. I like to think it's a trait he learned from one of his friends that acts in a similar fashion, albeit with a dash of violence in the latter's case. The story often cheats to ensure that he's the best option for many of the girls in the cast, even when it defies logic. As an example, one of Chizuru's close friends with whom she shares interests is often speculated by Kazuya to be her real boyfriend, even after they both shoot down that idea by reinforcing their friendship and professional stances. Much later in the story, it's revealed that Kazuya's baseless relationship claims are almost entirely accurate, and that the guy wanted to make the moves on her from the start, spurred along by the fact that he takes her on an elaborate impromptu date without her prior knowledge of his intentions. Worse yet, he's depicted as being incredibly pushy and demanding she take him up on his offer in exchange for more publicity in the acting world, ultimately ending with him asking what she sees in Kazuya to turn down his generous proposition. This would be a believable turn of events if there were hints of his true intentions peppered throughout the story, and Kazuya actually was a serious contender for Chizuru's heart in this instance, but he's not. Chizuru takes a liking to Kazuya because she's contractually obligated to think he isn't just a kid trapped in a college student's body. I would be a fan of Kazuya what I've described as something that can be considered ancient history for the character, but at this time, it simply hasn't happened and I doubt that's going to change. I genuinely wanted to like this series in earnest. When I first heard of it, a good friend and I were excited to see what direction the story would take past the interesting premise. A hopeless romantic enlisting the services of a rental girlfriend would make for some compelling storytelling if written well. Reading the first chapter of the story was harrowing to say the least, but I held on to hope that both the premise and the protagonist would gradually improve as the series went on. 156 chapters in, and Kazuya's doing the exact same song and dance except with different scenarios and more characters. To the creator's credit, he sculpted a rather compelling storyline by the 145th chapter, and Kazuya acts with a level of maturity that's honestly uncharacteristic of him, but it's just as quickly dropped after the central conflict of that storyline passes. It's formulaic, much to the detriment of the new ground that's supposedly being covered in the romantic comedy genre. My assessments hinge on the fact that the series isn't for me and it has no incentive in providing compelling characters and arcs beyond eye candy and shock value, something I honestly should have expected from a shonen work. This really should have been a seinen series. As it stands, Kanojo Okarishimasu is a teenager's perspective into an adult relationship dynamic, complete with all of its trappings. While it does try to win me over with a cute appearance and variable romance options, it's ultimately undercooked and in need of a once-over in several aspects for me to take it seriously beyond the first date. The way it conducts itself is charming at times, but considering it in terms of a serious romance option, I think it's for the best that we stay as friends.
Quiet, please.
Love hurts.
Mario Tennis rated E for everyone now on Game Boy Color.
Get into it.